My name is Valerie Naranjo. Right now we're sitting together on the 6th floor of the Minskoff Theater in New York City. The 6th floor of the Minskoff Theater is where the lighting folks do their thing, and it's actually the quietest place in the theater. So it's a good place to sit for a few minutes and talk about things. I came to New York directly from Oklahoma, where I did my undergraduate degree in percussion studies and vocal and instrumental music education at the University of Oklahoma, before which I was brought up in southern Colorado. My dad is Ute, my mom is from Navajo extraction, and they're both Hispanic. I started drumming when I was about 9. I remember wanting to play flute. I just saw, seeing native flutes and such, and just knowing the sound, I really had an idea I wanted to play flute. And my mom said, "No, why don't you try drumming? Because if you play drums, there's going to be more gigs that you'll be able to do." And I've got a mom who's never wrong. She always would steer me in the right direction. So I said, "Okay, Mom, I'll try playing drums." My mom never told me until about 5 years ago that she herself wanted to be a drummer. But when she was about 6, 7 years old and expressed that desire, my grandfather kind of saw ahead of her and realized that if she was going to be a drummer, she would be at the VFW Hall and the American Legion Hall and Greco's Bar down the street. So he thought that's probably not a great place for a young lady to grow up. So he steered her away from drumming. She steered me back towards drumming, but she never told me she wanted to be a drummer until about 5 years ago.
What town are you talking about?
Alamosa, Colorado. It's in the south. It's south central part of Colorado. It's just, I guess you could say, about 2 hours due north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I remember the first time I went to Ghana, I was hosted by one of the members of the Arts Council. Now, the Arts Council in Ghana is a totally sophisticated branch of the government. And back in 1988, you could not make a phone call across Ghana, much less to the States. But you could get a message to someone. One member of the Arts Council could shoot all the way across the country, getting a message to another, usually through letters that were delivered on the bus routes. So they had a complete network of people that disseminated culture, understood the multicultural nature of Ghana. And the officer who was assigned to me, because I was going to the Upper West, said, "Oh, so where are you from?" I said, "Alamosa." I said, "It's by Santa Fe." And he said, "Oh, I've been to Santa Fe. You are going to like our town." It's called Laura. "You're going to like our town because our town is like your Santa Fe and our people are like you."
That's beautiful.
And I said, "Oh," to myself, I said, "Oh, how nice. He's trying to make me feel happy and at home and my first time in Africa and such." Well, when I got there, I was flabbergasted. Adobe,
Oh my goodness.
roof huts, thatched roofs, the kind that my great-grandmother had, the same kind of corn, the same kind of red dirt, the same colors, the same kind of jewelry, and even much deeper than that, there was a pervading spirit among the people and their feeling towards community and towards family. It's just like what I grew up with.
Wow.
So I was flabbergasted. Yeah. And it really affirmed to me that, people who honor the earth are not that different from one another, regardless of where they're from.
Yeah.
Where on the earth they're from.
So, did you start your percussion studies in high school, or?
My mother actually started me at age 9. Was in the middle school band. And I was blessed. Both of my parents have a healthy, really deep respect for music. My grandfather on my father's side was a string player, piano and different strings. And his house was kind of the house where everyone got together. My grandfather was a farmer. And in the wintertime, especially on the weekends, there's not a lot to do. So he took it upon himself to open up his house for musicians to come in, bring their instruments, and play. And, the mothers and the grandmothers and the kids were running around, and it was just kind of a little cultural place. So my father really understood. Not only was music entertainment, but it was it had a healing property and a property that brings people together. So as soon as I started my studies, with the fortune of having 2 band directors, one right after the other, who were drummers, he said, this is good. This is good stuff. And my mother, of course, I told you her story. So I had a lot of support from my family. They felt like there had been a lot of women musicians in their backgrounds, and children, even children musicians. If someone had a passion for music, that was good. And no one said how old, what gender, just good. Please come forward. We need it. We need the music in our environment.
That's
So
wonderful.
they supported me all the way, as much as they could.
That's great.
Yeah, we couldn't afford a piano. So I didn't start my piano studies until I was in college. But other than that, anything that they could do, my father, saved all his pennies. And one Christmas morning, I was awoken by a cymbal crash. And I woke up, went into the living room. Our house was like, I don't know, 400 square feet. In the living room was a drum set. He had scraped together,
Beautiful.
and I got me a drum set because he knew that it was part of my passion, and it was something, and another step I was going to take. And I actually still play that set to this day. So it was really lovely.
So you went to college and majored in?
Actually, I started at the University of Colorado, majored in performance. I met a professor there named John Gom, and he was my idol. Wonderful world. This is before the term world music was ever coined, but an international kind of percussionist, and I just adored him. He went on to take a sabbatical the second semester of my freshman year, and he went to Brazil. And I was kind of brought up and nurtured by the graduate students. One of the graduate students was a Ghanaian. His name was Joseph. And he was actually, what would you call, a contemporary music clarinetist. So he broke his mold in Ghana a little bit. But he was from the Ewe people. And he took it upon himself to teach those of us in the percussion ensemble Ewe drumming. And immediately some things became crystal clear to me. First of all, a person who has technique is not necessarily a person who can connect with other people. Nor is that a person who can make people dance. So I started seeing, there's a lot of aspects to being a musician. It's not just learning your scales and learning how to play real fast. But the more important thing that Joseph taught me was when he would walk up to a chromatic marimba and play. And the first thing that struck me is the sound that he got out of the instrument. He pulled a sound out of that instrument that nobody had ever heard before. And I asked him, how do you get that sound out of a marimba? What are you doing? You're using the same sticks that we're playing with. And what are you doing? And he would laugh and go, I don't play this instrument. And I kept pressing him and saying, what are you doing? Come on, tell me about this. And he said, well, in our country, in Ghana, there is a marimba, and it's called the Gili, or it's called Gil. So that sparked my curiosity. Meanwhile,
and you were playing marimba at the time?
I was playing marimba, Western marimba at the time. Classical marimba. Meanwhile, I got a full Bureau of Indian Affairs sponsored kind of scholarship at the University of Oklahoma. Never been to Oklahoma. And I said, well, let me go and see. One of my band directors was really crazy about the program there. I said, yeah, go check it out. So I went and I saw a large Native American presence, first of all. The program was really integrated. The visual artists, the theater program, everything was integrated. And I thought, well, that's more like what I'm used to, community. Everyone kind of pitches in and does things together. So I was really attracted to the program. So I went there for the next 4 years.
Is that at Norman?
Norman, Oklahoma. Yes, yes. And
Been there.
it's a lovely place. I was a major in vocal and instrumental music education because I thought, if I can teach in a grade school or a school, then I'll be great. I'll be in great shape. I thought that's what I would do. And I still to this day enjoy teaching. So I did my vocal and instrumental music education. We had to play lab band. I got to play tuba and trombone and trumpet and cello and piano and all those things. And did student teaching and had just wonderful, wonderful teachers and a wonderful, wonderful community. So I love that, Not only that, though, they had a really great mentorship program. And so there was a classical marimbist from New York City named Lee Howard Stevens, who is he's really a pioneer of certain techniques and certain practices on the Western marimba. So he spent a week in Norman, and at the end of the week I said, I've got to do this. What can I do? How can I keep doing this? And he said, well, I live on 83rd Street in Manhattan. He says, you can move there. I have a studio of about 25 marimbas. And we get together, and I do private lessons. I said, okay, I'll see you there.
Amazing.
That was in 1980, early in the year. By August, I was loading up my little 73 Chevy Nova, everything I could pack, my marimba, and I moved there. And the second day I was there, I met my husband.
Oh, my goodness.
It was one of those, man standing at the door, doing, going, 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 going. Ooh. And I had to say I'm really blessed. Barry is a wonderful jazz trombonist, pianist, and percussionist.
Barry Olson.
Yes, Barry Olson. And it was just one of those matches that was supposed to happen.
Wow.
And we're a good team. We're good partners because we're both on the same path, and oftentimes we're on the path together. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So how can I say just how appreciative I am of how Mother, Father God, the universe has really placed things in front of me to say, you should be doing this.
Yeah, it sounds like your path was destined. You followed a path that was meant for you, and the things came to you in that way. It feels like.
And I've always had a curiosity to learn. I struggled through first grade because I just didn't get the process. But something clicked at the end of first grade, and then I just had this passion for learning. And of course, when that came to music, around the time that I was in third grade, I met my first public music school teacher, Mrs. Sucro, who could not sing. She did not, something about her vocal cords, she couldn't sing louder than a whisper. And I think that handicap just made her that much more passionate about music.
So she taught what?
She taught by just, examples. She got us to, she'd whisper her songs and we'd get to sing them, and she'd play piano, and she was just a lovely human being. And I just fell in love with music. I was crazy about music. So my path has been, even to this day, earlier today I was transcribing a piece from the Upper West, a Geely traditional funeral piece. And it just stretched my brain so much.
Let's talk about your trip to Africa. How did you happen to take that step there, to go there?
Well, after meeting Joseph as a freshman in college, I had this curiosity about the marimba in Ghana. So I started to, I did a lot of research. My graduate, which was actual performance and ethnomusicology, my research project was the Jew in Ghana. What I found from the conventional standpoint of academia and the research available, that there was very little. I kept going to all the, all the traditional sources or the Western sources and seeing very, very little. So actually what that did was bring me to the conclusion that if I really wanted to learn about this instrument, I was going to have to go there and do the research, be one of those people who did it. Fortunately, there is one of the pioneers of this kind of research all over the world is a lady named Verna Gillis. And I was able to find some of her recordings, and that really allowed me to hear some of this music. I found a recording, actually a friend of mine and I, when I came back from graduate school to basically Harlem, we combed the streets to find a record of African xylophone or African marimba music. And we just walked into every Dominican record store, and I just said, "Excuse me, do you have any African marimba music?" And they'd look at me, most of them, and say, "No. No tenemos aquí." So I did find eventually the African Music Center, which was very close to the Schomburg Center on 7th Avenue. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But I went and posed my question, and the gentleman said, "Oh, I know exactly what you mean." He turned around and he handed me an LP of, it said, Kakraba Lobi, xylophone player from Ghana. I said, "Oh, he's an interesting-looking young man," and he was sitting with this beautiful 14-bar instrument in the grass with his traditional clothes on. I said, "Wow, this looks intriguing." Of course, I bought the record, took it home, put it on the needle, and it was one of those moments in life when you say, "Boing, boing, 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 this is it!" And that's exactly how I felt. Maybe 20 seconds after the first notes, I said, this is home. I don't know why, but this is me. This is an expression of myself. So I began to transcribe things. I didn't have an instrument. I didn't know where to get the instrument. I went through, actually combed a lot of instrument shops, and I found a Malawian pentatonic instrument. The Gili is pentatonic, 5 tones to the octave. So I found a Malawian instrument, and I was able to work on that. I was able to transcribe with Western marimba. And I just fell in love with this music. I drove my neighbors absolutely insane. I mean, hours and hours a day of just understanding this music. So it was almost, for a little while, it didn't even really matter that I didn't have any gigs. I was playing on the street. I was unemployed. And I had a master's degree and wasn't doing anything with it except playing Bach, in front of the Metropolitan Museum for whoever would throw me a couple of quarters or $1. But my life throughout the 80s, probably from 82 to 88, was all about just getting closer to this music, and also getting closer to American popular music, and just understanding there's a connection here. It's not all about dun, 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 dun. Yes, it is about that, but it's much deeper. And I spent a lot of time in the Library for the Performing Arts, just combing through and finding recordings and things like that, and transcribing them.
It seems like the Jill would be a very difficult instrument to transcribe, because when you hear it played, it sounds like there's several people playing.
Well, when I first heard Kakraba, I thought he had overdubbed. So, I thought, oh yeah, it was one of these clever fellows who put one track down and put another one down. And I read the liner notes really carefully and I said, no, these are live recordings. So, Barry's a jazz musician. And one of the great things that happen, those misfortunes, that changing poison into medicine kind of things. In my building, it was a tenement building, you couldn't practice till 9 a.m. Well, I'm an early bird. I love to be up at 7, doing my thing. But I couldn't play. So Barry said, well, you should transcribe at 7 in the morning. Take some Cal Jader, take some Bobby Hutcherson, take some bags, take some of your Geely stuff. Sit down with the headphones and transcribe. That way by 9 o'clock, like 9 o'clock in 5 seconds, you will have fed yourself something and you'll be ready. And that was just the best thing, because I was able to really do it like a jazz musician. I was trained classically to that point, and it was all about, you read the music off the page and blah, blah, blah. But to go through that experience of transcribing bags and transcribing Bobby Hutcherson, I got to see it from the other way around. And so doing that really helped me to transcribe Geely music because they're coming from the same place, really. Or it's coming more like a place where Art Tatum would be. You know, one hand's doing this, one hand's doing that. And so I was able in my 20s to hone those skills. And I had student teacher advisors when, as an undergraduate, who were just, they were really meanie pies, and I was so annoyed with them. But they always said, write down, document what you're doing, document all the kids you're teaching, document this, document that. And to me, at the time, it was just a big hassle. But then, out of school, I started saying, this was smart. So I started documenting. What was I learning this week? What was I learning this month?
Wow. Interesting.
And that was a journey that it set me up for the rest of my life. I had good teachers in school, and then a lot of time with unemployment and 2 hours in the morning to transcribe. And what I used to aim for was I'd go out on the street and I'd make a certain amount of money, cover my rent, my $225 a month rent back then. And we'd cover our expenses. We'd, roll our own tortillas, cook our own beans, and play a lot of music.
So
And,
beautiful.
in a wonderful way, those are the richest years in our life, because we spent a lot of time together. We listened to a lot of music. Grant's Tomb was right down the street. We'd go and see Bags, people like Bags and the Jazz Messengers. Every Wednesday, we'd just go and see them and go to the clubs. And, we'd go to clubs that would take the last set, and you'd take your union card and you get in and you sip a soda and try to stretch $3, that kind of thing. But we're both crazy about jazz and crazy about learning. So that's what we did all of my 20s.
So what happened when you did go to Africa? So you met the man in the store who gave you the record, and that must have sparked you.
That sparked me, and then I started studying. Actually, Rob Levin, who is a wonderful trombonist, percussionist, pianist, he and I went to Ghana the same year, in 1988. He'd gone a few months before me, and he introduced me to a teacher named Gavin Ogbene, who is an Ewe drummer, wonderful mentor, teacher, performer. And I went and studied with him, and I said, I'd really like to go to Ghana. And he said, come to my place. I'll make sure you're everywhere. So great. Meanwhile, I had become a Buddhist, and that's a journey that we could talk about later. But one of the things that Buddhism teaches you is that you have to, if you want to be a really happy person, you have to understand what are you giving to the world? What is it? And you have to overcome the fear of really meeting that. So it took me a couple of years, but finally the January 10th of 1988, a bunch of us ladies got together. We made this big white box with the slot in the box, and we said, we're going to write down everything we're going to do in the year 1988. Wow. And I said, I got to write this down. What if it doesn't happen? All those fears that we put in front of ourselves. So I said, okay, well, it's time to face the music. Let's write it down. What am I going to do? And one dream I had for years was traveling to Ghana, so I wrote it down. Travel to Ghana. I folded up the paper. I got to do this now. And then the paper was halfway in, and I pulled it back out. Opened it back up, and I said, travel all over the world. Folded it back up, dropped it back in. So that one act taught me the power of cause.
Of cause?
Of cause. Like when we practice. It's one thing to think about playing conga. And I can think about it, but until I'm playing, I'm not really doing it. Yeah. So I can think about going to Ghana, but until I make a cause, I'm thinking it's all in here. So making that cause, I just began to put energy toward it, save my money. And by September, though, I was doing so many international road trips, my fortune changed. That I had 3 weeks and 3 days to make this journey. And I knew that a lot of people just went round and round in a circle in 3 weeks and 3 days. So I really put out my energy that I could do something valuable in 3 weeks and 3 days.
Because you were making international road trips? What do you mean by that?
I was gigging.
You were working.
I was working.
And doing tours.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I went through, I think, between Japan and West Germany. Germany was East and West at the time. So I carved out that little bit of time.
So your fortunate change from playing on the street to actually getting...
Yeah, well, in 1986, I had decided that I needed... I mean, I love playing on the street, and I would do it today if you told me to. Because it's fun.
Yeah.
It's just, you throw your whole self out there and say, world, it's here I am. I have music for you. And actually, the world opens itself to you. But obviously, you can't, if just like anything, if you become complacent and say this is cool and it's okay for me, you don't grow. So in 86, I vowed to change that. So I started doing shows in New York and things like that. And in 88, I vowed to take it international. So the first thing I learned, and I was sobbing on the way to the airport, Barry actually said, do you want me to buy a ticket and go with you? Because that's how I was frightened. There's disease, there's poverty, there's this, there's that, da, da, da. And I was fearful. Once I got there, the first thing I thought to myself after being there about 3 days, girl, if you had known this, you would have gone when you were 18. Because Ghana's a beautiful country, the people are friendly, there are antibiotics, there are things about disease, and yes, I caught malaria once, but I'm here, I survived it. But it's happy, it's healthy, the people are strong, the music is wonderful, the culture is upfront, and because of my fear, I didn't go for many years. So here's kind of what happened in a nutshell. I got on the airplane, I sat next to a lady, and I sat down and said hello, and she said, hallelujah, Jesus is going to save you. And I said, wow, I'm so happy you're so enthusiastic about your practice. Well, I practice Buddhism. And she said, oh, my cousin, she's in New Jersey, she practices the... So we had this long chat, we had hours, the flight is several hours. So we talked about this and that, and the other. And at the end of it, she said, I have suitcases. Can you kindly help me to get my suitcases through customs? I said, sure. She was my friend all of a sudden, because we had chatted. We shared our lives the whole flight. Well, her suitcases, I'm not kidding. And this deep, they were huge. They were half the size of me. And they gave her, because she's a Ghanaian, they gave her a very hard time. So I helped her, we just helped, we unpacked, they looked through everything. We packed it back up, and then I helped her out to the cab, and I had my little, traveler book, and I was going to go to one of the hotels. And she said, no, you're coming with me. I said, I can't come with you, she was going to visit her sister. She was surprising her sister. She hadn't seen her in 5 years. And I said, that's a nice surprise. I can't spoil that. No, just, oh, no, you don't understand Ghana. We are hospitable people. You're coming with me. I'm not going to let you go to a hotel. I said, okay, I'm coming with you. We went, her sister had moved. So we go with the cab driver to the sister's place. She wasn't there. So we go to another place. She wasn't there. Meanwhile, other people had started to help. The cab driver was totally, a cab driver is like, okay, give me your fare. Okay, goodbye. This guy he was part of it. He was like on the mission. And then all of a sudden, like we're at our second place, and they leave. And they leave for about 10 minutes, and I sit here, and this big spider comes crawling up. Oh. And I freaked out. I said, oh my God, they could be planning to kill me. This spider could bite me. And I just sat there and said, okay, calm down. You have a lot of fortune. No one's going to kill you. You're in a good place. And from that moment on, she took me to her sisters. We found the sister. They completely embraced me like I was family. Her sister and brother-in-law were both bankers. The brother-in-law took off the next morning. He said, "You are our guest. I have to show you everything." He showed me the Arts Council and where to buy water and where to cash my traveler's checks. And then he put me in the hands of Godwin Ogbele, and he asked Godwin, "Is she going to be okay?" And he said, "She is fine." And only then did he leave my side. And then Godwin assigned a guide to me. And we went to the Buddhist center. And from there, the guide said, in Buddhism we have cultures, they're called culture centers. And there's where people get together and they study music and language and they study Buddhism, obviously.
Was this in Accra?
This was in Accra. Mm-hmm. They're all over the world. And so the guide took me there and I met another person, total stranger, and of course we had many things in common. He left me there and he said, "Okay, we're going to go to the Upper West, where the Geely is originated. I will meet you at the bus in 2 days. You just get over jet lag. We'll meet there. I'll go with you." So we met there. My new friend, the Buddhist, took me to the bus. We met there, and he got me a seat. And the bus was delayed 8 hours.
Oh.
They had to actually repair the bus. Well, in 8 hours, I made so many friends that my guide said, "You don't need me. You're fine. You speak English. Everybody speaks English. It's a common language in Ghana. So I would be costing you money. And that's not fair. So you know, I'll go with you if you want to, but you really don't need me." That's the honesty of Ghanaians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he could have used the money.
Yeah.
So I paid him for the day. And meanwhile, I'm in the queue to take the bus, and I see a fellow with a Geely on his T-shirt. So I go up to him. I go, "It's a musician, you know, like Zildjian, Vic Firth. You know, we always have T-shirts." I said, "Oh, musician, cool." So I go up to him and I say, "Are you a musician?" He said, "No." I said, "But there's a Geely on your T-shirt." He said, "Oh, this is the mascot of my region." He's like, "Oh, wow." He was so proud. "Yes, this is our instrument." I said, "But you're not a musician." He said, "No, that doesn't matter, but this is us. This is our culture." I said, "Great, cool." He said, "Oh, you're a musician." I said, "Yes, I want to study this instrument." He said, "You have to meet the Ministry of Education. He's over there. He's on this bus." So we go traipsing over there, and I introduce myself, and I tell him my story. First of all, I tell him, you know, I only have 3 weeks and 3 days, so I'm just hoping that I can connect. He says, "Whoa, very good." He says, "Do you want to meet the Minister of Culture? He's on this bus." I'm like, "No, you're kidding me." So we traipse over to the Minister of Culture, and I tell him my story. And he says, "So, how did you hear about our festival?" I said, "Festival? What festival?" Then he looks at me like, "Gosh, you're lying." He said, "You don't know about Kobane?" I said, "No." He said, "But Madame," they're fond of saying Madame. "Madame, you are in the exact right bus to attend 3 days and 3 nights of Geely.
Unbelievable.
It only happens once a year. Nobody knows about it because they judge by the August moon. So they don't set the date until the moon comes out. Then they set the date. This is before internet.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, it's not like... And international phone calls were difficult. So he asked me, "How did you know?" I said, "I didn't know." So then he looks at me and says, "Oh, then you're supposed to be here."
Uh-huh.
I said, "I guess I'm supposed to be here." So he took me to Wa, the provincial capital, and he put a Geely in front of me. He's being the Minister of Culture. He had a lot of instruments. Put a Geely in front of me. And I had the whole weekend to transcribe, you know, all that stuff I'd done on other instruments. I was making the connections to the instrument. And they just left me alone. You know, would you like tea? Would you like some dinner? Would you like, you know, but they said she needs to do a lot of work. They left me alone for the weekend. On Monday morning, they transported me from Wa, which is the capital, to Laura, which is about a 2-hour drive because the roads are really difficult to travel on. They transported me to the host village of this festival. And they put me in the care of the most progressive woman in the whole town. Her name was Vida Tenidunya. And she was a controversial figure because she was one of two wives of her husband, yet she owned a business and she taught at the secondary school. And so she was really stepping out of her role as a homemaker. And people, so they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to, and the story gets better. But anyway, they put me in her care, and she took really good care of me. The Tuesday morning, they took me to the compound of the master musician, the master Gili player. His name is Nebun Baru. And his English wasn't very good, but through a translator, I had a grueling interview. First of all, what are my intentions? Why am I a musician? How am I going to serve the people? Because in this culture, there's three things that happen. When you hear music in your ears, there's energy that comes from the instrument, therefore the person who makes it. There's energy that comes from the composer, and there's energy that comes through the musician themselves. And if any of those energies are not right or correct, then what you're getting, you're like getting bad medicine. And they consider the sound vibration of music to be a medicine. So you can't just put someone behind an instrument. They've really got to understand a few things. So when he was satisfied that I had the intentions that were correct, and because of my background, which they called Red Indian, just to crack me up. Oh, you're Red Indian. Red Indian. We see you on the television, those kinds of things. Baru said, okay, put an instrument in front of her. So I've been practicing all weekend. So I started to play. And it was one of those moments, in life. The people who were sitting around knew the song I was playing. So they whoa, and they started singing. I was playing this music. I had never heard, it in context. So I said, whoa, and we just made this connection. It was one of those moments. So after that, I had 3 teachers, and I was for 3 days. Again, without my knowledge, there was some wisdom going on. They said among themselves, she's here for a reason. We need to prepare her. Let's let her do her work. So for 3 days, literally for about 12 hours a day, one teacher, then the other, just started showing me things. And on the 3rd day, they took me to the village chief. Now, normally, tradition has it, the first thing you do when you blow into town is go to the chief's palace. But they kind of had me over at the compound. They took me to the chief. There was a council of elders, and there's an agenda every Monday through Friday. It's real true government. It's very, very impressive. The elders, although they're all men, they're elder men, but the elders and the chief sit in a circle, drink a beer, or millet beer, which is called pito, and they discuss very seriously the State of the Union. What's going on today? What's going on this week? What's going on next month? Has this family dispute been settled? Should we help? Should we let them alone? How are we going to host Kobe? All those from small to big issues are discussed at sundown over a beer. So on the docket that day was this lady from the United States. She's going to come and play Gili. And so I walked in, I was introduced. No, I'm sorry, the first day was an interview. Same kind of interview I had with Bob. Who are you, what are you, why are you? And then actually he said, come back the next day and bring your instrument. So I brought an instrument, and 2 of my teachers accompanied me. And I kind of felt like when you're 12 years old and you're doing your first recital, that's kind of how I felt. Oh, this is nice. They're being so nice to me. Oh, how cool. I'm going to do a little recital. Okay, so I played, and the place broke into an uproar in Dagar language, and I was only there for a couple of days, so I didn't know what they were saying. I was still on greetings. I had no idea what they were arguing about. Bitter, hot argument. So I'm with my Baru, what are they saying? He said, you be quiet, you're just sitting. They were arguing, they were debating. there are two major traditions. Number one, when a stranger comes into your midst and they want to know about your culture, well, first of all, any stranger is welcome. That's a given. But if they are studying culture, if they want to know about you as a cultural entity, you have to do everything you can to help them. Okay. Second tradition, women do not play the G. Mm-hmm. So they were saying, okay, and I came in right before Kobane Festival, so obviously the next place was for me to be playing. So they were saying, especially after hearing, because I had studied this, mind you, from 1983, this was 88, I'd studied this for 5 years. So I already knew how to play, even though the connection had just been made. So they were saying, do we break this tradition about the Geely and allow her to play and help her, or do we break the tradition to help her and therefore keep the tradition of playing? And they just went back and forth. And the Chief Carbo, he had actually dressed up for that occasion. Usually, I mean, he always dressed well as a chief, but he dressed up. And I remember the moment. He stood up and he had these robes, they were purple, and he raised his robes up. He said, from now on, women are going to play this instrument. And it all, again, it clicked, and I said, oh my God, that's what they're arguing. Barry, why didn't you tell me this,
Fabulous story.
Yeah, so I said, oh my gosh, I didn't bring anything for you.
I'm sorry.
It'll have. So anyway, from that time on, and some of the gentlemen were physically angry. They were like, oh. But what the chief says is law. It's kind of like Congress and the president. You can talk about it, you can argue about it, but when the president says, that's what it is. So the whole time women were coming to me and saying, oh, for the first time, like, oh, show me. And they weren't going to their uncles or their friends. They were coming to me because in their tradition, things do go along gender lines. But as an aside, the following year, there was a Kakube Festival, which was 18 miles away, and a woman placed second. So you know that she didn't learn a year before. She had been playing in secret. Uh-huh. So it really changed some things. One of the things I really had been in prayer about, because I heard from a lot of people when I started considering traveling to West Africa, I called people on the phone and I met with them, and I wanted to hear their story. And, I was hearing a lot of, well, we took lessons, and I took some lessons, and I ran my tape recorder, and that's it. And I'm like, well, did you... some people had made connections, and they brought people over to go to school, and, I thought, well, I want to leave something. I don't want to just go and take music, and I already knew what a treasure this music was. So I wanted to leave something. And so I was able to leave something. Mm. And besides, the sponsorships and things like that. But so it's like kind of an answer to a prayer for me.
The other people that you had talked to, they weren't studying geo probably, they were studying drums.
They were studying drumming, yes. And other things, singing, dancing, things like that. But
that's a beautiful story. Very, very beautiful story.
Well, I feel like, one of the luckiest women in the world to carry this story. And to be able to encourage other people. Because that's why we play music, really. I mean, and from the standpoint of the Geely, that is encouragement. When you sit down and play that instrument, it is to create a sound vibration that changes the life condition of the people. So it's almost like being a doctor. Mm-hmm. And the biggest responsibility for a musician who plays this instrument is for the funeral, because it is the awareness or the belief, if you want to put it that way, that when a person dies, there are 3 things that happen that transport the soul. The Geely, the sound vibration, the tears from the women, and the dancing of everybody in the community. Without those three things, the soul doesn't leave. It stays. So you have to have that. So when someone dies, the Geely player is the first person they call. And if it's the middle of the night, you get up, you take your instrument, you go to the front door of the compound, and you play. Because it's a transition that 9 days later, it happens. And for the funeral, it is non-stop music. And I've literally seen it so many times. Someone will be playing, and the other person comes, and they actually take over. The music doesn't stop.
Do the Geely, do they play together? Will they have several? Or?
They're played two at a time, oftentimes. Among the Dagara people, it's in pairs. Among the Lobi people, which are two nations in the upper west of Ghana who play the Geely. Among the Lobi, it's one instrument, and then there's a bell, which is like clave, but it keeps the skeleton time. And then there's what's called a ganga, which is a long cylindrical drum. It's one stick and one hand. So those three are the core. And then actually the musicians are in the middle of the core. And there can be additional musicians, but then the dancers dance in a circle on the outside. So yes, of course, in theaters, now there are theaters, there's restaurants and things like that. So you can see cultural presentations of this music. But traditionally, to see it, you have to walk right in the middle of the heat of the energy of the dancers and singers. And so it's never just the instrument and the players. It's always like just this energy. And when you're in the middle of it, literally the literal temperature is up. But just something's swirling around your life. And that's what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
And so when you see people who live according to this energy, it's awesome. I mean, this is a nation of people, or several nations, in the upper west of Ghana, which is close to Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast. They don't have a lot of money. Their farming season is really sporadic. There's not a lot of rain. There's not a lot of anything. They just don't have a lot of material things. But I think in my life, they are some of the most content people I've ever seen, anywhere in the world. Because they understand sound vibration. They understand that happiness comes from inside, not from getting this and getting that. They understand that happiness comes from connecting with other people. And they understand that connection with the past. They're very respectful of the past. Because they understand that I as a people, or I as a unit, come from somewhere. And I'm going somewhere. And if I understand where I'm coming from, then
you know where you're going.
I know where I'm going. They understand, and they, one thing that really impressed me, they understand I as a unit that includes everyone. Now, I was very close to my family growing up. But being an American, as I am, there was the individualism of being I. But in Ghana, okay, I was given a private room. They said, you probably need that. Private room to sleep. But once I got up in the morning and walked out that door, I was a unit of a lot of people. So brushing my teeth, taking tea, practicing, I was never alone. And, that was a big barrier for me to break. Because I was always like, go into a little room and work out my little things. And That didn't happen here. And my audience were children. There were from 5 to 20 children, and they would always sit around me. And there was an occasional naughty child, but for the most part, they were very attentive. And they would just listen to everything. Can you imagine how that feels? Like, okay, let me work this out. I have 5 kids that are watching everything. The first time I took a break, though, is when I really understood how they learn. I took a break. I got off the seat. The Geely's very low to the ground, and the seat's about that high off the ground. So I got off the seat, and I'm going to get a cup of tea. The children, it was like musical chairs. Who could be the first one to sit in that seat and prove to the other ones that they had observed what I was doing enough to play it? I turned around and said, holy smokes.
And they were doing it.
That's how they learn.
Mm-hmm.
They have in their backyards, it's called pampulo. It's a little gili. It's like a toy gili. And it's only a toy because it's made out of material that's not as expensive. The wood is not as aged as a proper instrument. And it's stretched over a hole in the ground. That's how the kids play. They watch their elders, and then they come and they play for each other. And they go, no, not like that. This is what he did. And that's how they not only learn music, but they learn silversmithing. Or they learn all kinds of things that way. And so being in that society just blew my life wide open. And you know how we're always told that music is an expression of the people? Then I understood. Only then, I understood this music. Because I understood the people.
And maybe how the first man that ever played for you got that sound.
That's it.
It was really coming from inside.
It was coming
him.
from the inside of his life. And that's what I was hearing. But I was hearing it as a sound. And, you know, to this day, we've all heard a lot of amazing musicians. But there are certain musicians who create a sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from, you know, all the joys and struggles and grief and hardship and good things that comprise their life. And that's what I was hearing in Joseph. Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
So how did you meet your mentor?
He was, remember that record I told you about?
Yes.
He was the person playing on that record. So, of course, in the record of the xylophone player in Ghana, that was Kakraba Lobi. Kakraba Lobi. So for many, you know, for a couple of years, I just transcribed. And then I found him via Verna Gillis and her research.
Mm-hmm.
I found him on other records. And so I said, I've got to meet this man. I started writing letters, and eventually I found him, and we began corresponding. And so by the time that I went in 1988, he had offered an invitation. Unfortunately, or it's one of those misfortunes that turns into fortune, he was in Japan when I went there. So I studied with people like Baru and my first teachers that I told you about. And he was also away the second journey I took in 1989. In 1991, I took my third journey. And by that time, we had corresponded in such a way that we would meet. And so I met him. We met at the Riviera Beach Hotel in Accra because he played the happy hour there. And he had two instruments. And I think, you know, at the time, he's a very gracious person. And he was always, even before we met, he was looking out for my comfort. And he thought, you know, this place, not very many people go there during the day. It'll be comfortable. She'll be able to practice on the beach. And it's close to the Arts Council, and she'll be comfortable there. Furthermore, there are two instruments so that we can study properly. So we met at the Riviera Beach Hotel, the restaurant where he played his happy hour. And he said, okay, so here's our program. We're gonna get together 6 days a week, and we're off on Sunday. Now, do you want to study like an American, or do you want to study traditionally? Of course, I said, oh, I want to study traditionally. You know, none of this American stuff, you know. He said, you know what his answer was? I said, oh, okay. So he said, okay, come tomorrow with a bottle of spirits. Okay, fine. So we met the next day, two instruments, put them down, had an unopened bottle of gin. I handed it to him. We took 2 glasses from the bar, and he poured 2 glasses. Here's the glass. He poured that much for me. He poured about that much for himself. And he blessed the instruments. He poured 2 droplets on each beater and 2 droplets on each corner of the instruments. okay, he said, and he gave me my glass. He poured on his instrument, I poured on mine. And he said, okay, now say a prayer. So I said my gongyo, my recitation. And he said a prayer in Lobi. And he said, okay, now.
The whole thing?
The whole thing. And we began to study. And the first thing you study, which I had to study for a week before I learned any song, is called pide. Pide is a direct communication. It's very linguistic. It's like music without a tempo marking or without time.
Mm-hmm.
So there are phrases like babu 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 babu. He said, now you. So imagine how inebriated I was. So I kind of struggled, like, oh, what did he do? What did he do? And, it didn't take me but a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, to know that I had no intellectual capacity. I mean, I just drank a glass of gin. So I said, okay. So I started to pray silently to the ancestors. I said, I don't really understand what's going on, but I need your help. So, please, if I'm supposed to do this, I can't do this with my mind because my mind's not here. So please help me. Do you know what? I started playing stuff. I watched my hands play things. Like, oh my gosh. You know what he did? Like that. He just nods the whole time. Okay, now this. Oh my gosh. He's going like this. So that was the end of our first lesson. So, I don't know if I staggered home or whatever it was, but I had a lot to think about. I said, this teacher is most unusual and most extraordinary.
Uh-huh.
I better fasten my seatbelt and really, show my respect and listen up, and get my rest, and straighten up and fly right, because this man is very serious about what he's doing.
Right.
So we were talking about Kakrava.
After your first lesson.
Yes. So we studied pide for a week without the gin because we had poured libation. That's what we had done the first.
Yeah.
And now came the task of intellectually connecting and understanding why we have to connect with the spirit realm. And after those grueling studies, then we began the first piece, which was funeral music for men of the age of elder fatherhood, younger grandfatherhood. And that style is called darpe. Well, it wasn't until years later that I understood, or maybe months later, that I understood that darpe is probably the most difficult style. There's one called gun and one called darpe, and gun is probably the most difficult, but darpe is very next to that. So of course I asked Kakraba, why do we start with that? And he said, you don't start with what's easiest, you start with what is most important. Mm-hmm. So he had all these kind of perspectives. Mm-hmm. Kakraba himself was part of a family of many, many master musicians. Just like master silversmiths, master seamsters, master farmers, they're all run in family lines. So master musicians run in family lines. So that when you learn from the womb. You listen. And many, many hours and days and years before you actually learn. Like others, Kakraba decided when he was young to move away. To move from the Upper West to Kumasi, which is the second biggest city. So there was a big, split, not to be a farmer. He had other things. So he tried to learn how to weave kente cloth, he tried to drive a cab, he tried to be a farm worker, he tried all kinds of things. They all failed one after the other. Like Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
No, that didn't work. He moved to Accra. He tried to be a laborer for laying plumbing, municipal plumbing. He was too small. So they put him as a water boy. He said he was in the middle of misery, like, oh, I'm failing. I'm a failure. He had a cousin who had a G, an uncle, sorry. He went to get the instrument. He didn't have money to go back to his accommodation, so he walked with the instrument. He stopped on the way, put it down, and started to play. There were women in the market, and they just went crazy. They said, what is this? Who are you? What are you doing? This instrument is cool. The music is great. They threw him money. They said, come back. We love what you do. So this began his career as a street musician.
And he had been playing as a young child? Or?
He had been playing as a young child, but he hadn't played for about 5 years. But he still had it. Played in the street. The professor in Katia, who is one of the most famed ethnomusicologists in the world, saw Kakraba, said, you're very gifted. Why don't you go to one of the radio stations and, play for them? So Kakraba took his instrument, went to the radio station, like you would go to, imagine going to a radio station and saying, I'm here to play. But, like a street musician, he said, I would like to play for you. Was heard on Ghana radio, excited of the National Dance Company and the International African Music Studies at the University of Ghana. They offered him a teaching post. And he said, no, I like being a street musician. And they sat him down and said, look, we're going to offer you a health plan, etc., etc. Would you please consider coming? Try it for a year. And he said, oh, okay. The First National Dance Company of Ghana was born, and he was part of it. They traveled throughout the world, and Kakraba used to do a little bit of his solo music while they were changing costumes and things like that. Well, then the impresarios saw that he was a very gifted musician, and they began to invite him back as a soloist. And of course, the jealousies that would invite. But what happened is that Kakraba learned about audiences, and he's an incredible performer. I say that he's now deceased for about 2 years. But he was one of those performers that he would just ignite a stage with his intentions and with his beauty. So, this is the man I met. He'd been to Japan many times, he'd been around the world, and he learned how to craft this dance music into something that an American or a European or a Japanese audience could listen to. And I think that's how I connected so heavily with him, because I could hear that he could be on a stage all by himself and make you laugh and cry and tell a story. And so our first studies were about that. This is what the tradition is. This is how you would present it to someone. And actually, I didn't know this at the time, but he felt like I could be the connection between Ghana and America. Of course, at this time, I had transcribed all this, and, within our first 3 years, I started to think, wow, I would love to make this available to American players. I would love to do, but I was afraid to ask him, because he was such a purist. Mm-hmm. Okay, so finally in 1997, after I'd studied with him from 91, one morning I got the courage. I said, this is the morning, I got to ask him. Basically, I would go every August and September and study with Kakraba. And I go back up to the Upper West. I studied with his cousin, Say, and, connected with his land and connected with him. Kakraba lived in Accra, the capital city. And the morning I was going to make this connection, do I have your permission can we do this? Can we write this down on paper? I thought he'd say, no, we don't, this is an oral tradition. His brother came. His brother spoke very fluent English. And I told his brother, Louis, it's his English name, I have this idea, I want to present it this morning. I just met Louis that moment. He said, oh, I think Kakraba will like that. He likes the world. He understands the world. He's traveled widely. So Louis helped me translate all the little specifics of what I wanted to do. And Kakraba was delighted. Yeah, so That was 97. By 1999, we did our first tour in America.
Oh.
We presented at the Percussive Art Society International Conference.
Oh,
And we had 2 pieces of music, funeral music, as pieces of paper, as music that American marimbas could read. And
wow.
it was a wonderful thing. And I think really after that, in 99, he came, he brought a lot of instruments. He disassembled them because, you know, cargo is done, if things are very light, they're done by what's called volume weight. So it would cost a fortune to bring a Geely from Ghana to America. So he assembled them, disassembled them so they'd be nice and small, shipped them over, and reassembled them in my studio.
Wow.
And he spent hours and hours. And meanwhile, I had a lot of students. And of course, you know, I was really gearing him up. I said, my teacher's in town. You've got to get it from the source. So he had constant students.
Oh,
and he was, you know, presenting instruments to them.
when you presented at the first time you came on the first tour, did you have a lot of people playing marimbas that they were reading the music? You were talking about reading the music?
We did a lot of presentations in colleges and universities, and we presented the music, and people, you know, got the music and started to study it. And at the conference itself, we talked about our journey, and we played a lot of music.
You and Kakraba.
And Barry played,
Barry,
played ganga.
Okay.
So we were a trio. And of course,
Oh, I see.
the bulk of it was Kakraba playing solo.
Uh-huh.
We played some trio pieces. I played the transcriptions. And then the line of people to meet him
Oh, amazing.
and, you know, buy the CD and buy the music and start to study it. It was probably 40 people long.
Oh, that's so great.
So meanwhile, I think we presented 5 times in all at the international conference. Because people just said, oh, this is so wonderful, you've got to do it again. So the last time we presented was right before his death. And you know, up to that time, we presented at colleges and universities in the United States, and just to anyone who would listen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there were a lot of people.
He died in 2007?
He died in 2007, July 20th.
July 20th?
He was 73 years old.
Oh.
And I was in Alaska doing a summer arts festival. And Sekou Sundiara had died just a few days before him. Sekou Sundiara was one of those really American mentors, poet, who just, how to connect poetry and audience and music, traditions and modern. And he was also a very good friend of mine. And many, many well-known Ghanaian master percussionists died that same weekend.
Oh, my goodness sakes.
So it was an auspicious time.
Mm.
Mm. So to put it in a nutshell, because I think we're going to have to make it a nutshell, it looks like.
Yeah.
This art, it's just been such a treasure to me. And I think it's been certainly... I really think it's no mistake that studying this, first of all, on a technical note, learning this music is extremely difficult. And when you learn it, you integrate it, but what happens is you sound like 2 people. So I began to apply this to multi-percussion. So I play one instrument with one hand and one with the other.
Uh-huh.
People would come up to me and say, my God, how do you do that? And I'd have to say, I studied Geely, it's a West African instrument, blah, blah, blah. But I began to do a lot of gigging in this manner. I ended up gigging with David Byrne with tons of instruments around me. I got fired from that gig. Right before we went on tour. We recorded the album right before we went on tour. I got fired. I was devastated. It was a little bit of a man-woman thing. I never had that experience. Of course, you know, we all have it in some way, but never on a professional level. I was devastated. I had lots of friends come around and say, don't do that, fill the space, move ahead. And
what reason did he give for firing?
That it wasn't a good fit.
Uh-huh.
And that's fine. He had his reasons, but you know what? It was my good fortune. First of all, I spent a year, most of 2004 in South Africa. Wouldn't have done that if I'd been on the road with David. But more than that, it plunged me into the kind of depression where I had to dig deep and say, okay, who are you? Why are you doing this? Because I was in my mid-30s and I didn't have a gig. I was still I wasn't playing on the street, but I was still, a little gig here, a little gig there. And it kind of hit me like, okay, I might, at the time, mid-30, I wasn't that old, but I'm like, I'm going to go into my golden years with no gig. Am I really committed to this? Is the music my treasure, or am I fooling myself? And I would get up. In Buddhism, we chant to a Gohonzon. It's a scroll. And we chant the words Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And that is to clear our space so that we can think clearly and let our full life shine through. So for about 50 days, I wake up in this horrible depression, and I would sit and I'd go, I am going to change my life. And this was, I don't know, early summer, but in mid-August, one day, I was, I'd done with all that, and I was walking from my apartment to my studio, which was down the steps in the same building. And it was like something had lifted off my shoulders. I felt like, yeah, I'm exactly where I need to be. No more like, why didn't I get fired? How come I'm not this? I'm not tall enough, short enough, black enough, white enough. All this stuff I was going through. Mm-hmm. I'm too female, I'm too this, I'm too that. No. I am Valerie. I'm exactly who I should be, and I'm exactly where I should be. That's it. And I felt happy. That evening, I got a call on my answering machine. It was from Lenny Pickett, who directs a Saturday Night Live band. And I played in one of his art bands years before, and he hadn't called me for years because I sent a sub, and he was a really great musician. I thought, oh well, he was so great. Lenny didn't call me anymore. But so here's Lenny on the machine. He says, "Call me back." No, let me leave the message now. We have been considering you for Saturday Night Live. We opened up a percussion chair. We feel that this band and this show needs the energy of a percussion player. So the chair has been open since early summer, and you have been the person we wanted to be in. We have been debating from the music department to the production department all summer long. Okay, this is the time I was doing my thing. The music department says, we need you. The production department says, we're doing a 10% budget cut this year. We can't add another musician. So back and forth, we've been going back and forth. But just today, Valerie, we broke through. And you have been asked, we want you to join the band. Now, mind you, he said, it's on what do they call it, probation? So you're going to do the first 3 shows on probation, because we're not sure, you've got to prove yourself. But I hope you're in town, because if you're not, we're going to have to pass to the next person. Because they made the decision today. The show starts in 3 weeks. Had I been with David, I would have been in town. Mm-hmm. I'm starting my 15th season.
Well, that's so great.
In about 3 weeks.
That's great.
So, when I heard that, there's those times. It's one of those times, like when Kakrava and I had the poured libations. It's one of those times when I sat and thought real hard. Okay, life is very profound. And there's a reason I suffered through that summer. Because really, since that time, since that autumn of 1995, I have not looked back. Which means something about being on a major television show, people begin to look at you and just say, she must be serious. She's doing that job. So she must be a decent musician. Uh-huh. So I could tell somebody about traditional music or the Geely or whatever, and they will listen now. Uh-huh. Not because they've heard it, just because they know that somehow I had to walk through my rings of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really opened up the things that I am here to say. Secondly, just being on the show. You know, the only other show that has... No, that's not true. There are 3 shows that have a full-time percussionist, but one of the other shows is The Tonight Show with
Right.
Vicki Randall.
That's right.
So, you know, interesting coincidence that on 2 coasts there are 2 women on 2 of the major
Yeah,
shows.
that's really great.
That's a wonderful thing. And it's helped a lot of women, I think, to adjust. You know, I think we as people, we as Western people especially, we tend to see images and kind of put them in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And the image we've seen is a guy behind the djembe or a guy behind the drum set. And so I tell my students who are women, you know, because a lot of us struggle with being dissed and, you know, being not even asked to do gigs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just tell them, just go out there and do it. Don't worry too much. Just go out and play because people have to see you. If we're going to change, just like people saw those gentlemen who saw me in Laura and who were so angry when Chief Carbeau said that women have to play. They saw it then, but they saw it and they saw it over and over. And now, you know, 20 years later, they're used to seeing a woman behind a djembe.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's beautiful advice, I think.
Yeah, so we have to just be out there and do what we do. But, you know, and I tell a lot of my students and a lot of friends of mine, especially women, my story that I told you about being in that queue going to Copenhagen Festival in the first place because I took years to do that. Oh, but what if? But what if? But what if I get sick? What if I get robbed? What if? And if we always live in that negative world and we don't really garner the courage to go to the unknown, do that stuff, it'll always be a what if.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do what if, go and do it. And if you make a mistake, you know, it's okay. Do the next thing. And that's been my treasure, you know, my family and my Buddhist practice. My mother is one big person to say, go out there and make the mistakes and just, you know, if you step on somebody's toes, say you're sorry, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Take them to dinner or, you know, make amends and then just step forward. You know, a mistake's a mistake, no big deal.
Yeah.
And certainly in music, I mean, you know, didn't someone tell me once that those in the medical profession, if they make like 5 times as many mistakes as we musicians make.
It would be dead.
You know? So, mistakes, trial and error. You know, that's what it's all about. So, you know, the SNL thing is very, very, it's a wonderful benefit. But it's really, the biggest benefit is that it was part of me changing my karma and really being able to look inside and say, you know, I'm supposed to suffer because that is like, it's like firing gold. And when I say suffer, that summer that I suffered after coming back from South Africa and having been fired and nobody called me and it's what I needed to go through to really gain some clarity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's easy to be encouraging and encouraged when everything's going right.
Mm-hmm.
And when something really goes wrong, that's when you really understand, you know, are you really courageous? Can you really encourage also another person?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if I'm really fortunate, knock on wood, for the rest of my life I'll be able to encourage other people.
I see. Beautiful. Let's just take 5 minutes and tell me, we're here in the theater of The Lion King. Tell me about your percussion work with The Lion King a little bit.
I started playing with Julie Taymor. I was playing in the subway. Actually, it was called Music Under New York, this little program that lasted for years, actually, to try to get street musicians underground. And I thought I tried it. You know, taking a marimba into the subway is no joke. It's no picnic. But one of the times that I went, I was playing, and this gentleman came. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, and he came I'm leaning halfway over the marimba this way, and he's leaning halfway over the, and we're like this far from each other, touching heads. So I'm playing my song, thinking to myself, this is either a genius or a derelict. Let's see what happens when I finish the song. So I finish the song, and you know, people are nice, and they give you a little bit of applause. And he said, you know, my name is Elliot Goldenthal. I'm a composer. Elliot's a very famous composer. My wife, Julie Taymor, is doing a production of Shakespeare's The Tempest. It's a little theater on 13th Street in the Village, and we have a marimbist. We have one musician in the budget. Right now we have he's primarily a marimbist and a percussionist. His father is ill, and he has to go. Would you be willing to take his place? I said, well, it sounds interesting. Shakespeare, wow, that sounds great. So, to make a long story short, I did that first production with Julie and Elliot. Elliot wrote the music. Elliot's a genius. He writes in such a way, he listens, he himself's a great trumpet player, but he listens to how people play and how they love to play, and that's how he writes. So that the musician feels very much inside of the music.
Like Duke Ellington.
Yeah. So that was the first production. I did several other productions with Julie, and I did something called Juan Darien that was the setting of an Uruguayan, Uruguasha storyteller. And when we were preparing to set this up at Lincoln Center, she gave me a phone call and she said, hey, Juan Darien has been chosen to be in Lincoln Center. Wow! I said, cool, let's do it. You know, we've been to festivals in various places. And she said, and by the way, I've been asked to do The Lion King. I said, you mean the cartoon? Yeah, they're going to do a Broadway production of The Lion King. She said, have you seen the movie? I said, no. Have you? She said, no. Apparently Disney Theatrical Productions had seen Juan Darien. So they asked her to direct The Lion King. And she asked me, she said, you're the first musician I'm asking. I said, what am I going to say? No. But I thought, you know, Julie is she is not a commercial, like, you know, she's very left of center. She's very controversial. Kind of excellent director. And if you ever see Titus, which is her movie setting of Titus Andronicus, you'll see what I mean. She takes it like way. When I saw Titus, like, my hands were shaking. That's how deep she goes. So when she said Lion King, I said, Julie, are you sure you're going to do this? And she says, yeah, I'm going to try. I have something to say. So a few weeks later, she said, can I bring some production people to your studio? So in walk all these people from Disney Theatricals, and they wanted to hear what I do as a musician. And it was so funny because I didn't even have enough chairs for them to sit on. I said, I'm so sorry. Here, you know, here's a little bench, here's a Julie bench. And, you know, I played a few things, and they played The Circle of Life. And they said, what would you do with this song? So I got behind a marimba, and I said, well, okay, I just kind of played by ear. And I said, well, I'd probably do something like this. And so, you know, a couple of days later, they said, okay, you're hired. Can you help us write? I said, wow, okay. So myself, Satoshi Takeshi, who's a wonderful drummer / percussionist / angel, Mark Mancina, there was a CD that was done in South Africa. After the movie came out, a lot of South African musicians, including Lebo M, who did the arrangements, the vocal arrangements, and Mark Mancina, got together, got a budget from Disney, and they said, we're going to put a CD together of what The Lion King would be if it became a Broadway production. So they did this years in advance. And so we put this together in 1995. And then from 95 to 96, am I correct? Or is 90, I think it's 96 to 97. 96 we began. From August 96 to the end of the year, we were doing arrangements and just various things on all levels, costumes and such, which I wasn't involved in, but the music I was. At the beginning of 97, we auditioned percussionists, and I was fortunate to be part of that process. And in May of 97, we began to rehearse. We took it to Indianapolis for the summer. And basically my schedule that summer was I would get up, we'd have 10:30 a.m. rehearsals with the orchestra. We rehearsed till the middle of the afternoon, went home, took a shower, came back, did a preview, finished the preview, and then all of the creative team sat in a big circle, talked about what worked, what didn't work. And then I went into the orchestra room alone and wrote until 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's how my summer went. It was beautiful because...
So you wrote a lot of the percussion?
I wrote percussion, the African-oriented percussion things, and I also... Bob Elhai was one of the orchestrators. Wonderful orchestrator. He comes from a classical background, so...
So you would write arrangements, or you were actually doing the compositional...
I was writing the arrangements of the percussion
of the music
for the orchestral music.
Wow.
And so that's my role here. And then I was the first, what they call section leader. So when we came back to New York, it was like, okay, so Valerie, percussion 2, or whoever that person is, name remains nameless. That part is not working very well. Is it the player? Is it the part? Is it the instrument? Go figure it out. So we did that until opening night. And that was many years ago.
Oh,
and there's something very interesting about this piece. It's attracted, there's no star in The Lion King. It's not like a Broadway show that has the star who everyone comes to see. First of all, there's a lot of masks, and there's a lot of people behind masks. And so there's this kind of community here. It's really very beautiful, and of course, it's always under metamorphosis because the actors usually don't stay for very long. They like to go from one show to the other. It helps their body, their mind, and their spirit to move. Mm-hmm. So I've seen a lot of different communities come through The Lion King, but there's always a real camaraderie, and since it is an African-oriented show, it is it's South African specifically, an African-American based cast and ensemble. And there's just this beautiful thing going on here. And I knew it was something special because, opening night, so many people came and said that the opening piece brought them to tears. Mm-hmm. And, people still say that, but and it's just like Joseph, back there at the University of Colorado. You hear something, but there's something there behind it. And there's something about this piece that there's a lot of community, there's a lot of love behind it, and there's a lot of that, good old African me, I is us, and past equals present equals future kind of thing going on. That's what makes it really special. All Broadway shows are special for one reason or another, but that's why I think this show is really special.
Gosh. There seems to be that message is over and over coming over and over in your life.
Yeah. Community. And family. I was very fortunate to have a big, beautiful family. And actually, one of the first things that happened when I went to the University of Colorado is I started meeting people who didn't have those family connections or those community connections. So, I'm not sure exactly the details of my life path as it moves forward, but certainly one of the things is community. And interesting, one of the things that will happen this year, I've been asked to play at the Olympics in Vancouver. And the specifics are Native American, but how does the tradition meet the modern world? And how does that build community?
Wow.
And right before I was asked to do this, I met this wonderful composer named Jared Tate, who composes for, 100-piece symphony orchestra. Yet he fuses that with the native themes and such. So, and then I call up my friend Stephen Alvarez, who's Apache, who actually lives in Anchorage, and he directs the Native Heritage Center there. And so I say, hey, would you like to do this? And he says, yeah, I've been thinking about how first of all, how we could work together, but how we could send this message of, the native or the traditional or the earth people, if you want to put it that way, people who have grown up close to the land and the earth. How can we get our message out there in a contemporary world? In a under the lights, under the spotlights and things like that. I think, I think I have, part of my path is to bring those things together.
Absolutely.
How to, for example, walk off of a plane having been in Ghana and not change clothes and walk into NBC and still be myself and still do what I do and be the same person and not compromise. To know that we are the same people. We don't have to pretend we're